In the silence of the desert, a family followed the path laid out by God. Abraham, a man known for his faith, walked alongside his wife, Sarah. They had one great desire: to have a child. However, time passed, and Sarah remained barren, and their anguish only grew. Their dream of becoming parents seemed increasingly distant. The starry desert sky was witness to the lonely nights and silent glances they exchanged, filled with unanswered questions. Sarah, longing for a child, made a difficult decision for that time. She asked Abraham to have a child with her servant, an Egyptian woman named Hagar. Thus, Ishmael, Abraham's first son, was born. When he was born, Ishmael was like the fulfillment of that great desire for fatherhood. Hagar was proud to be a mother and looked at the boy with affection, but that house began to fill with mixed feelings: joy, hope, insecurity, and even envy. In time, God fulfilled his promise to Sarah as well, and she had a son, Isaac, already in her old age. Seeing Isaac grow up, Sarah was afraid that Ishmael might have some greater right, or that he might take her son's place in the family inheritance. The atmosphere became heavy, and often Ishmael, even though he was only a boy, noticed suspicious and exclusionary looks. On a memorable day, Sarah asked Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Abraham was saddened. After all, Ishmael was also his son, but God said to him, "Do as Sarah has said, but do not be afraid, for I will also make a great nation of Ishmael." So, under the scorching sun, Hagar and Ishmael set out into the desert. The water in the skins soon ran out, and hope seemed to dry up with it. Hagar placed Ishmael under one of the rare shadows and moved away so she would not see her son die. She wept, filled with pain, because she had no strength left. However, God heard the boy's cry and sent an angel to comfort them. "Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy," said the messenger. Hagar then saw a well of water and managed to save her son. Ishmael grew up in the desert, becoming strong, an archer, and a survivor. He lived with his mother and later married an Egyptian woman. Even though he was cast out, Ishmael knew he was not alone. He was part of God's greater plan. His name means God hears, and he proved that hope can spring forth even in the driest sands of the desert. The lesson of Ishmael's story is profound. Even when we are rejected, God does not forget us. Even in the most impossible situations, there is a hidden well of water ready to give us new life. So when we feel lost, we can remember Ishmael and know that there is always someone listening to our prayers. But Ishmael's destiny does not end there. After finding a new beginning, will he find peace with his family, or will he forever carry the scars of rejection? What else happened on this courageous journey through the desert? And how did his descendants transform the destiny of many peoples? Ishmael grew up among the sands and the wind, with the burning sun as his roof and the silence of the desert teaching him lessons of strength and loneliness. Hagar, even though she carried with her the pain of rejection and memories of the home she left behind, devoted all her love and protection to her son. At each dawn, she remembered with gratitude the well provided by God, proof that they were never alone. Ishmael understood the harshness of life from an early age. He learned from his mother the courage to start over, and from the desert the perseverance to face the improbable. He became an archer, agile and determined, the strong arm that protected his own history. With watchful eyes, he observed the caravans that crossed those lands, always wondering about his distant brothers, his father, and the inheritance he would never have. Despite his isolation, a sense of purpose grew within Ishmael. He held in his heart the certainty that God had plans for his life. The name Ishmael echoed as a constant reminder: God hears. When loneliness weighed heavily on him or difficulties seemed greater than he could bear, Ishmael remembered the comfort he had received as a boy, when the angel promised him blessings and descendants. Thus, he faced each day with hope. One night, Looking up at the stars, Ishmael heard his mother tell him about God's promise. "He will make you a great nation, my son." These words healed the wounds left by abandonment. Time passed, and Ishmael became a man. His heart sought a place in the world, a family, something of his own. He met an Egyptian woman and made a home with her under the same sky, where he had once cried out of fear and anguish. His experiences shaped him and taught him resilience, compassion, and divine trust. Even far from Abraham and Isaac, news of his old family arrived sporadically, bringing feelings of longing and questions about reconciliation. However, Ishmael knew that his story was not marked only by rejection, but above all by God's care, which never failed him, transforming pain into hope and isolation into strength. In his heart, only the question of destiny and reunion remained. Would he one day have a restored relationship with his father? And what legacy would he leave to his children born under the desert stars? The desert taught Ishmael that what we desire most does not always come through the hands of men. Day after day, he watched travelers pass by and heard fragments of stories about Abraham and Isaac, lives that seemed as distant as the stars he watched at night. Inside, Ishmael fought a silent battle. He wanted to feel like he belonged, not just a survivor, the son of an elusive promise. His pride in being strong and protecting his family was mixed with longing for his father and doubts about his true place in the world. Hagar sensed this restlessness in her son's eyes. One windy afternoon, she approached Ishmael and squeezed his hand tenderly. "All pain has a purpose, my son. Even abandonment teaches us to walk with our eyes raised to the heavens." These words touched him deeply and encouraged Ishmael to seek a greater meaning, something that transcended the hurts of the past. With the arrival of more children, Ishmael found himself faced with the challenge of teaching them resilience and faith in the face of the unknown. He remembered his mother's look of hope and strove to ensure that fear and bitterness would not be passed on from one generation to the next. Still, the nights were long and his thoughts persistent. In his simple and sincere prayers, Ishmael asked God for the courage to forgive and the humility to accept his journey. Each new day, his children brought him smiles and questions. "Father, who is our grandfather in distant lands? Why do we live here, far from others?" Ishmael responded with dignity, telling them about Abraham and how God honors even those who have been cast aside. Looking at his children, he wanted to give them something he had never fully felt: security and pride in their roots. Then rumors spread across the sands, bringing news of Abraham's aging. Ishmael's heart beat fast at the possibility of a reunion, mixing hope, fear, and expectation. He felt he needed to make a final decision: continue being just a man of the desert, or finally reach out for reconciliation. The challenge of overcoming the scars of rejection and opening himself up to forgiveness stirred ancient secrets in his heart. Under the same sky where he once cried out for help, Ishmael now prepared to face the greatest challenge of faith, to walk into the past and discover if there was still a place for him in his father's story. Time continued its silent course, but inside Ishmael, something was changing. The arid landscape was no longer just a setting for isolation. It had become a land of learning, where seeds of hope could sprout in the dryness of abandonment. Among his daily tasks, Ishmael watched his children running free through the camp, laughing and playing among the tents. He saw himself reflected in the eldest, noticing in the sparkle of his eyes not only joy, but also unspoken questions. Hagar, now with silver hair, cared for her grandchildren with firm gentleness, but her tired body betrayed the passing of the years and the weight of old afflictions. One late afternoon, as the red sky mingled with the golden dunes, Ishmael felt a different kind of restlessness. A foreign caravan was approaching, carrying perfumes, fabrics, and novelties. Among the travelers, a middle-aged man recognized Ishmael by his resolute gaze and the features he had inherited from Abraham. The conversation was reserved. The traveler brought news from distant lands and finally stammered about the fragile health of Abraham, now old and nearing the end. The following nights were filled with insomnia and internal conflict. Ishmael walked around the camp, hearing only the whisper of the wind and the echoes of his childhood. He wondered if he could really forgive the past, if he had been faithful enough to the voice of God who had said he would not abandon him. In the solitude of the night, he prayed as he had never prayed before. He asked for understanding. He asked for humility so as not to become bitter. He asked for courage to face the truth that awaited him on the other side of the desert. The decision to leave matured slowly, watered by restrained tears and the memory of stories told by his mother, stories that spoke of a God who never forgets his own. Before leaving, he gathered his children and Hagar. He looked into the eyes of his family, conveying more with his silence than with words. "I will return," he promised, "because I need to know the relief of forgiveness and show you that we are more than old pains." The desert seemed colder when Ishmael walked away, but inside him burned a new fire, a desire to find not only Abraham, but also his own destiny. Each step left behind not only footprints in the sand, but pieces of fear and hurt, making that journey toward reunion a true rite of passage in search of a healing that only faith could offer. The road through the desert seemed longer than ever. The wind raised clouds of sand, whipping Ishmael's face, but his heart resisted more than his tired feet. Every rock, every lonely bush, evoked memories of childhood and despair, of hunger, thirst, of the day they were expelled. The silence now was more than the absence of sound. It was the space where Ishmael spoke to God, without words, only with sighs and tears. At times, he almost felt like giving up, but the memory of his family, Hagar's trusting gaze, and the hope in his children's eyes kept him going. On a particularly dark night, he camped near a small hill. The sky seemed closer, with billions of stars like promises. The cold was intense, and Ishmael wrapped himself in his cloak, feeling the weight of everything he needed to give up. He lay down beside a rock, exhausted. In the middle of the night, he woke up frightened. He felt a strange peace, a presence that was not of this world. Tears came without asking permission. Then he heard a soft voice within him, as if the wind were whispering among the dunes. "You are seen. I have not forgotten you. Your blessing will be like the stars in this sky." At that moment, a vivid memory flooded his mind. His mother, Hagar, finding water where there was none, saved by a divine promise in a moment of desolation. Now it was his turn to be visited by the same God, sealing in his heart the certainty that he had never been alone. He felt all the hatred, fear, and contempt drain away, as if a well of living water had sprung up in his parched chest. At dawn, Ishmael remained kneeling, watching the sun rise, his soul light and renewed. The desert was no longer just a place of exile. It had become sacred ground, a place of encounter and transformation. Ishmael's face, marked by fatigue, now reflected serenity. His resentment toward his father dissolved, like fog dissipating at the first ray of light. He realized that his journey was already a miracle, and that his reunion with Abraham did not have to be a victory or a defeat, but the gentle redemption of his bond with the past. Carrying within him a renewed faith, he stood up, feeling that his next steps would be taken not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. God had not forgotten him, and now Ishmael would not forget himself either. The sun rose slowly, tinging the sky with golden and reddish hues, as Ishmael resumed his walk. The cold air of dawn still swept across the dunes, but inside Ishmael burned a new warmth, the fruit of a night of spiritual revelation. The morning silence cradled his thoughts as he moved forward with firmer steps, feeling that he carried within him a promise and no longer abandonment. The memories of the words whispered during the night, "You are seen," echoed in his soul like songs of hope. As the day grew full, Ishmael noticed the desert changing before his eyes. The path seemed to open up gently, as if the earth itself were guiding him. In a previously unknown stretch, he came across a small oasis, hidden by rocks and bushes. The crystal-clear water reflected the sky above, and in the deep silence, Ishmael recognized the same divine care that had saved his mother years before. He knelt at the edge of the well, dipping his hands in the cool water, feeling renewed in body and spirit. He recalled the entire journey of struggle and discovered that behind every hardship was the invisible hand of God, shaping his character, teaching him trust and surrender. There, in the shade of the palm trees, Ishmael raised a song of his own, giving thanks for his survival, for the miracle, for the pains that had been transformed into strength. In that stillness, he heard the sound of footsteps in the sand. An old merchant, leading a goat, approached, surprised to find someone there. The man commented with admiration that he had never seen that oasis on his travels. Ishmael understood that this well was, more than ever, a sign of the God who sees and provides, even in the most unlikely places. He offered water to the traveler, shared his food, and listened to stories of the world beyond the desert. The generosity of that encounter confirmed Ishmael's certainty that his existence was valuable, that his presence in the world had purpose. Before leaving, Ishmael picked up a small stone from the ground and kept it as a souvenir of that moment. The oasis would be his testimony stone, like a silent altar to God's faithfulness. Reinvigorated and with determined steps, Ishmael resumed his journey to find Abraham. The decision to move forward, leaving his old pains and fears behind in the desert, became the greatest act of faith in his life. Not because he expected restitution, but because he recognized that he had been transformed, ready to forgive and build a new beginning, sustained by a faith that had overcome all his inner deserts. Ishmael continued through the desert, feeling lighter and lighter after his encounter at the oasis, and with his heart strengthened by the presence of that merchant, so unexpected and significant. The horizon burned with light and heat, but nothing seemed capable of stopping him now. The silence turned into complicity, as if the earth itself were witnessing his journey. At night, the stars became silent prayers for all that had been and all that was yet to come. During one of these early mornings, when sleep was slow in coming, Ishmael gazed at the sky and understood that he had been guided by something much greater than human will. His entire life, even his rejection and exile, had followed an invisible thread of purpose. He had not been forgotten or abandoned, but chosen to become someone who survived where few would endure, whose strength sprang from suffering, whose heart learned to welcome without resentment. When the landscape began to show signs of civilization, Ishmael felt the weight of the moment approaching. He mentally retraced the road he had traveled, the marks on his body and spirit now precious memories. That night of revelation under the stars had been the beginning of the turning point. The oasis was no longer just a well. It was a symbol of God's care, repeated through the generations, a reminder that the greatest blessings are born where least expected. With each step, Ishmael relived Hagar's gaze, her unshakable faith and teachings. That dignity depended less on circumstances and more on the heart. Ishmael remembered his mother's premonition. Not all pain is punishment. Not all joy is the absence of struggle. He had to trust. At the edge between the sand and the cultivated land, Ishmael hesitated for a moment, the climax of his journey becoming as intense as the midday desert heat. It was the border between the past and the future. There, he felt an irresistible force rise within him, mixing mature tenderness and certainty. He was no longer the young man who had left resentful, nor the man who carried open wounds. He carried with him marks that had become insignia. His heart was ready to meet Abraham, no longer seeking acceptance, but as one who understood the meaning of everything he had lived. He had not been just a survivor, but a bearer of promise. Ishmael's purpose became clear at that point. It was time to forgive, to honor his path, and to teach his children that from pain comes true blessing. The scent of the first olive trees and the sight of tents in the distance indicated the proximity of his destination. Ishmael, upon reaching the edge of the desert, felt sweat mix with tears that flowed without restraint. Each footprint in the sand was now a symbol of someone deeply transformed. There was no longer the weight of fear or hurt. He had come from afar, and yet he walked with the lightness of one who had rediscovered his worth under the watchful eye of God. As he crossed the narrow path between the fields, he remembered the days when he knew only rejection and silence, a childhood marked by his father's absence and his mother's protective embrace. Today, however, he recognized himself as the fruit not only of pain, but of promise. He knew that his existence echoed the strength and faithfulness of the God who watched over him, even in the darkest and loneliest nights of the desert. With each step he took toward Abraham's tents, his heart beat with gratitude and serenity. He no longer sought answers, only the chance to close the cycle and move on. In front of the camp, people stopped to look at him, some surprised by his appearance, others whispering about the stranger returning from distant lands. Ishmael stood up with dignity and asked someone to tell Abraham. He waited silently, feeling the wind warm his face. In the distance, he glimpsed the figure of his father approaching, older than he remembered, but still with the same solemn bearing. The reunion was not marked by long words, but by lingering glances. Abraham, moved, extended his hand to his son, and in that simple gesture, Ishmael felt that all his old wounds were beginning to heal. There was no need to remember the mistakes, for in that embrace lay all the truth and all the forgiveness. There, in front of his people's tents, Ishmael understood the value of resilience, the price of forgiveness, and the greatness of allowing pain to transform him into someone stronger and more generous. He knew that he had returned not to rescue what was missing, but to leave behind a legacy of faith and hope. He saw in his father's eyes the confirmation that, despite the distance and the choices they had made, they were both bound by the love and purpose planted by God. And that certainty, intimate and silent, was the true victory. In the solemn silence of that morning, Ishmael and Abraham stood side by side in front of the camp, under the watchful gaze of everyone. The wind blew gently between the tents, and it seemed that time had stopped to witness that long-awaited and unlikely moment. Between father and son, the old pain dissipated little by little, like clouds driven away by the light. Abraham, now with trembling hands, looked into Ishmael's eyes as if searching for lost time, and Ishmael felt at that moment fully seen, accepted, and loved by the father he had so longed for. A deep emotion overwhelmed them, greater than any separation or injustice. As the women murmured in the distance, Ishmael remembered every moment of deprivation, Hagar's voice encouraging him in times of thirst and fear, and he felt keenly that all his suffering converged on that moment. It was as if an ancient blessing, reserved since before his birth, was about to be revealed. Abraham took Ishmael's hand in his, and with a look full of tears and pride, he spoke words of recognition and blessing over his lost and now restored son. No envy or rivalry, no difficult past could resist the power of that embrace, renewed by love and sealed by faith. Before them, the members of the household recognized Ishmael, no longer as the exiled boy, but as an inseparable part of the people and their history. Children approached in curiosity, and their light laughter was like music softening the drama of the past years. Abraham, his voice choked with emotion, prayed to the God of promises, offering grateful praise for having found Ishmael again and for being able to present him with tents, an altar, and a family in response to a bond that had never been forgotten. When the sky lit up in gold at sunset, a sense of peace enveloped the camp. The thirst of the desert was forgotten, all scarcity canceled in the face of the reconciliation experienced there. Ishmael realized in his heart that he was not only the heir to a promise for himself, but also to a covenant that spanned generations. The miracle had happened. The man of the desert, shaped by rejection, gave back to the world a reconciled heart, blessing his children, his brothers, and those who would come after them. Abraham and Ishmael, together, sealed with tears and faith their commitment to share, to rebuild, and to never again doubt that God's faithfulness transforms even the greatest wounds into sources of blessing and rebirth. Time passed over Abraham's tents, and Ishmael found his new place among brothers and nephews, integrating himself into the people he had once only observed from afar. Around the campfires, stories about the desert, the trials, and the miracles began to spread, and Ishmael realized for the first time that his voice and experience inspired others to persevere. He taught the children the silent power of hope, reminding them that no pain is in vain when one trusts in a greater purpose. Hagar, standing beside her son, smiled proudly, her eyes shining like the small pools of living water found in the midst of the arid landscape. Reconciliation did not erase the past, but it gave new meaning to every scar and every loss. Ishmael became a symbol of that people, no longer the outcast, but the link of courage and faith between generations so different. His gaze turned to the starry sky on many nights, giving thanks for being an instrument of a promise and for having learned to forgive, even what seemed unforgivable. The family reunited, and the blessings shared were now living proof that God is faithful, even in the most arid of paths. In unity, all former hunger for belonging was satisfied. There was no doubt left about the value of persevering without hardening, of returning even when pride or fear told him not to look back. Ishmael finally understood that promises are kept to those who do not allow themselves to be consumed by bitterness, but transform their history of pain into a path of hope for those who come after them. He walked among his people, steady and serene, ready to be remembered not only for his origins, but for the power of a choice, to reconcile, give thanks, and continue living, bearing witness that the greatest miracles are not just signs in the sky, but hearts restored and bonds remade in love. If this journey touched you, don't forget to like it, comment on what you thought, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one.